We will call this informational meeting for Tuesday, October 2nd, 2018 to order. Welcome to everyone here and everybody watching at home. We will get started asking Councillor Neitzert for an update on the audit committee meeting that they had recently.
Yes, we had a very productive meeting, a lot of good conversation. We recognized Arnie Martins, who left the board. We introduced Tony Gotch, who is our new board member. We introduced Rich Oxel, who is back with us part-time. We talked about our staffing. We talked about the in-progress audits, which are the Zoo and Great Bear, which are about 60% complete and getting there. Rich went over the follow-up of recommendations from 2017, which he completed. We had a discussion about the status of the 2018 audit plan and what we will complete, and talked about bringing an amendment forward to the City Council to amend the audit plan to remove some items that won't get done because of staffing. And we had a discussion of how to formulate the 2019 audit plan, and we will bring some of that stuff to the final meeting of the year. And we had a discussion about Abby's travel and training. She is in Chicago this week at an Institute of Internal Auditors week-long training. And that was our meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Neitzert, and thank you again for all your efforts with the audit committee. Next, we'll go to our administration update with Erica Beck. Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me again today. Just a couple of real brief updates. One specifically, next week there will be a first reading that will come forward for the council's consideration for a supplemental appropriation, and this is for the Affordable Housing Division within within Planning and Development Services. They have available appropriation balances that were carried forward from prior years and revenues in excess of what they anticipated. And so they're going to be coming forward asking for an appropriation so that they can use just over $1.8 million for a combination of, from a combination of different funding sources, including their federal grant income that they receive, their revolving program income. So I think you've all heard them talk to you about their neighborhood revitalization program and the fact that they go out, they purchase lots, they work with Affordable Housing Solutions, they build a home and then they sell that home. That's the revolving program income that I'm referring to. So they will bring that forward for your consideration at first reading next week and then second reading on October 15th. And then the contacts for that, if you have questions prior to next week, will be Les Kinstead from Affordable Housing or Mike Cooper from Planning and Development Services. Also, just another real brief update. So similar to the presentation that I'm going to provide in just a couple of minutes here in regards to tax increment financing, one of the other programs that I'd like to request time on the council's calendar for is the property tax abatement program. So just to get everyone up to speed on how we've utilized that program in the past, what it is, and some potential revisions for that moving forward that we would like to propose. So that will be within the next couple of months. We'll probably bring that forward through a committee meeting in which we can talk about, again, the historical use of that program and some of those proposed revisions so that we can ensure that the results are what we want for our community. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Erica. Thank you again for your continued updates. We'll open it up for City Council open discussion. Councillor Staley.
Erica, I would make a suggestion, and I think I may have some support about this on the council, but when you come forward to do the tax abatement thing, do it as an informational so we all get to hear it. Sure. So when you do it as those committee meetings, I know you did a thing on vacations, and two of us were gone, and Janet Brecky was there. But I just think it's beneficial if we all hear the same information. That's just my suggestion on that. So thank you. And then I know we talked about the audit committee last week. Councillor Neitzert did a presentation on the history of why we have our audit department. And back to the audit committee, we had a great discussion, and one of the things that I thought was very important was the discussion about fraud and making sure we put checks and balances in our city's interdepartments to make sure that we're getting ahead of that. And a suggestion was made that we do more promotion, and I know Councilor Neisert is checking into this, but I just want to say it publicly again, that we put more energy into letting the employees know that there is a fraud hotline, that encouraging them if they think there's anything going on to report that. Then at the audit committee, we had a discussion about putting out a hotline to the public that if you are a citizen and you think there's something that needs to be addressed, you can call in on that number as well. And I know that financially they said we're paying about $2,000 a year and we're only having 2 or 3 phone calls made from the city's employees hotline part of it. So I don't know that it would be that much more expensive to put that out to the public and say, we want your feedback to help us. And the other thing that Councilor Neitzer was bringing up is that he was asking for suggestions on future audits. And I made the suggestion that we put that out to the employees as well and say, is there a department that you would like to see audited? Because I do believe that our employees, the people with their feet on the ground, are the ones who really know what's going on. They're the heartbeat of our city government. So just wanted to recap on that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. I am still pursuing the survey idea of city employees. There's a lot of action going on in terms of the fraud hotline. I was on the phone with the company that we contract with earlier this week, and I've obtained some documentation, and we're going to follow up and probably have another call on Friday. They wanted to have some time to find some things for us. We have a new customer account representative. The company that we originally contracted with years ago was acquired by this new company, Navex Global. And so I'm working on getting the dissemination list, is what they call it, which is who will get the reports when somebody calls in. And we need to get that list so we can get that updated. Best practice is to have it to go to at least 2 people. So you can go to like the audit manager and maybe the city attorney. And then also a phone tree of who would get called if there's certain things that if they're imminent threats or somebody that sort of thing, that there's phone numbers that should be called, so you can have your, let's say, your risk manager or your police department called. I got the current contract from years ago, but I'm asking for the new contract or whatever their stipulations are. I guess I should put it. We've just been paying an invoice yearly. It's like $1,980 or something, and it is based on 1,100 city employees. So I'm going to have that conversation of what's your methodology of pricing, and what if somebody wanted to expand it? How does that work? So there's a handful of things, and I'm sure I'm forgetting everything, but I'm actively going down that trail. So I'll have more updates on the fraud hotline shortly. And also, I'm going to work to get a new placard made that could be hung in break rooms with new updated information and a citywide email and all that. But first I want to kind of nail down the current information from this new company so we can kind of, and maybe multimedia can help us come up with a pretty little thing. So working on a lot of that. So. And
Mr. Chair, if I may, what about expanding that to the public being able, are you looking at that as well?
So I was going to ask them their pricing model and what it would be if we were to open it to, let's say, the public. So yeah, that was one of the questions that I had, and we were going to follow up with a discussion about pricing. How do you develop your pricing? If it's not 1,100 people, if we were to open it to the public and it was, if it was 185,000 people, would they change their pricing? So.
And which department pays for that cost?
That comes out of, I'll have to get back to you on that. I think it comes out of audit. I think it's in our budget. Yeah, it's in our budget. Like I said, like $1,980 yearly or something like that. So
I would think that if we were working with city employees, this is jumping out of just our city council realm, and if we were going to be doing more promotional things for the employees, I'm wondering if some point we could partner up with the city for that cost, if it gets to be quite a bit more.
Yeah,
discussion to have.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 things. Saturday afternoon, my wife and I had the privilege to go through home field condos over on Sycamore and 10th Street by, what's actually 8th Street by B&G Milky Way, one of the programs that we're doing as a city that we are participating with affordable housing solutions. And so I really like the idea of downsizing to a one-bedroom for my wife and I, and the kids can go somewhere else by the time we're done. But I think we'll have a couple of years before we do that. But it was really intriguing. A lot of the neighbors were coming to check out what they were in that neighborhood. But for a young professional, I think they're in the $160,000 price range with $10,000 down payment assistance. It's one place that, a small place, but a place that we're making some improvements as a council and as a city government to provide affordable housing or accessible housing. I got to get the terminology right. I'll get the memo by the next time I do that. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly, as I have in the past, next Monday is Native American Day in South Dakota. And here in Sioux Falls, we'll be having our first Native American Day parade. Richie Richards from Rapid City is a reporter for American Indian News, has been the organizer of the event and has worked really hard at it. But there's a couple of other events that are also going on for Native American Day. The parade itself, the Native American Day Parade, is downtown on South Phillips to North Phillips at 10 a.m. At noon, there is a traditional storytelling with Jerome Killsmall at the Sanford Medical Center Memorial Garden. At 1 o'clock, there'll be a hoop dancing with Jackie Bird, and it'll also be at Sanford Medical, but in the center lobby. And then at 7 o'clock, there is a wasipi or powwow at the Multicultural Center. The thing you want to keep in mind, though, is there's also a meal that's provided at 6 o'clock to come before the grand entry that begins at 7 o'clock. I'm excited for our first day of honoring our Native Americans, and it goes back to Governor Mickelson and the Year of Reconciliation, and we have a ways to go with our Native brethren. And I think this is one way that we can do that and take a day to remember our heritage of our state and our country with our Native American friends. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Starr. Anybody else? Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, thank you. One other thing that I did forget that I wanted to kind of lift up for people was not this last Friday, but the Friday previous to that. I was able to be an observer at Avera McKinnon. For lack of a better term, I'm going to call it an active shooter exercise. It was more than that. I don't remember what they called it, but essentially they closed off part of the hospital, and they did a simulation that was as realistic as they could do. And they actually had emergency management there. They had hospital employees. They had somebody who was playing, quote unquote, the active shooter, and they went through everything, including they primed Metro Communications. They had the employees knew something would happen, and they had to try to do exactly what they would normally do. And there was a real 911 call. There was a real response, and they had to find the active shooter. And then all of the emergency people had to come in, and they were able to practice what would they do in a mass casualty event where you have a lot of casualties, people down in various levels, and so you had the police. And so they were able to practice a lot of that, and the point of that was to practice a lot of the stuff that they've been trained and kind of find out what worked and what didn't work. And in fact, they did a debriefing at the end, and which was very interesting to hear them kind of talk through all of it, of what worked, what didn't work. And there was a lot of things that all the different branches learned, and even Avera learned of, if we could do this better, this didn't quite work right, this communication. And so it's encouraging to know that that sort of stuff goes on here, and you don't hear about it, that they're training for these things, for these eventualities, because unfortunately it may visit us someday. But it was a really neat thing to see, and they really, really work well, and they're trying to improve all the time. So just want people to know that our city is working on that, so they're prepared.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, after that we will move on we have a presentation on tax increment financing, or TIF, with our Chief of Staff, Erica Beck. Welcome back.
Thank you again for having me. just go through this presentation. If you have questions throughout, just let me know, because I do want to keep it informal and answer any questions that you have. The purpose of this is just to give all of us the same baseline foundation of information moving forward, so that if you do receive a request in the next several months, we're all on the same page as far as how we've utilized TIF in the past and how we can utilize it moving forward. We're going to talk about what TIF is just real briefly, because I think all of you have heard this maybe several times. How it works, how we can utilize the tool, how it's been utilized in Sioux Falls. We'll go through just a couple of examples of specific districts that we've had in Sioux Falls thus far, the application process, as well as reporting moving forward from the administration to the council. So tax increment financing, what it is, this is just a simple definition. It's a development finance tool that captures the future value of an improved property to assist in reimbursing the current cost of improved project improvements. TIF was first authorized, in South Dakota by codified law, Chapter 11-9 in 1978. We developed, or recreated, I should say, a diagram. We had been utilizing a diagram for a number of years, and I think it was a little confusing. And so we've recreated a diagram to try to simplify the how, so to speak, of how TIF works. TIF pays for approved improvements. So approved meaning those improvements that are listed in your project plan that comes before you for consideration. And it uses anticipated new tax dollars from the development, so the land within the boundary, to do that. In this instance, the baseline property value, when a district is created, the district valuation is frozen, and that baseline valuation continues to be paid out to the taxing entities over the life of the district. And just so that everyone is aware, South Dakota codified law allows for the max time frame that a district can be in an active situation at 20 years. Increment taxes are used to reimburse costs associated with long-term debt, typically, for eligible and approved expenses within the plan. These types of costs are defined by state statute, but they typically include things like land preparation, so site excavation, everything up to the actual construction of the building, acquisition of land, public parking facilities, or parking facilities in general can be included, environmental cleanup, demolition of existing properties, road construction and reconstruction, utility relocation, other public infrastructure such as sidewalks, parks, detention ponds, architectural and engineering fees, finance costs. All of these types of costs are eligible for reimbursement through a tax increment finance district. Just as a reminder, in order for the reimbursement of these types of expenses to occur, the expenses had to have incurred as well. So if a district is created, and I'll point that out in just a couple of slides here, but if a district is created, you approve a project plan with eligible expenses to be reimbursed up to a certain amount. That's the max amount that can be reimbursed. Oftentimes, and in the next example, we'll see that that's not always the case. Sometimes the improvements come back less than what was anticipated, and so the district doesn't actually reimburse that full amount that was identified in the project plan. So in order to put this diagram to life, so to speak, I just used TIF 17 as an example, because TIF 17 just recently came before the council for termination. It's lived out its life, so to speak. This was the TIF for the Williams Pipeline site, just so that we're all familiar with what that is. This is the Williams Pipeline site, the before and after. The before here is from 2012. This is before the construction occurred for both the Costco retail facility along with the apartments that are located just to the east of the site. So with respect to the diagram itself, you can see that the district creation occurred in 2012. The baseline then at that time for property valuation was frozen at just over $1 million. The span of the district lasted 6 years until 2018 when it was terminated, and the tax increment amounted to just under $1 million. So this is a good example of what I was just referring to about that increment not always being the same within the plan as what is actually reimbursed. In the plan, I believe the increment or the plan's reimbursable expenses was up to $1.5 million approximately. So because the expenses came back less than what was in the plan, that's what was actually reimbursed. The value of the district after the project was completed and at the time of the TIF being dissolved is just over $25 million. So you can see the differentiation between the baseline property value when the district was created and in just 6 years because of the project improvements that increased to over $25 million. That makes sense as far as how this diagram works. This is kind of a good diagram because I can utilize this, or we can utilize this as a city when we bring forward these types of projects with all of you for consideration and showcase what that baseline will be, what we anticipate the value after project completion to be, and what we project that increment to be as well. Again, this is the Williams Pipeline project. Okay, so how can we use this tool? I wanted to comment on this because I think sometimes in the past we've focused on one area, so environmental remediation. That's often been utilized as a justification for TIF. But then we forget about all of these other ways that this tool can be utilized. And this council plays a part in that, and we want you to play a part in that moving forward as well. So I've listed these 3 very general statements on the screen. The first being target areas of specific industry and economic growth. That's one way in which we can utilize this tool as a community. So the Discovery District, as an example, we brought forward a request earlier this year for appropriation of funds for the Discovery District to help pay for infrastructure. We could have utilized tax increment financing to assist with that as well, but because of the time frame associated with the request, there wasn't an opportunity to create the district, put together the project plan, and bring that before the council for consideration. So just as an example, we can utilize this type of a tool to assist with that target for our community. If we want to focus on biomedical research, technology, industry growth within our community, we can utilize this tool to help us do that. We could also utilize the tool to help focus on the encouragement of additional corporate headquarters to locate to our community, or industry, or any other industry for that matter, based upon what it is and how we want to see our community grow. And I'm just using a lot of hypotheticals here, so if you have any questions on that, let me know. The next bullet point is target redevelopment in specific geographic areas. This is probably how we've utilized TIF the most in our community over the last several years. We've very much focused on downtown for a long time because there is greater risk when it comes to developing downtown. And typically that's because of the additional costs associated with environmental remediation. But it also has to do with soil conditions, fractured bedrock that's often found in this area. And so what we've tried to do in the past is equalize that playing field for developers and property owners within the downtown area so that it's a little closer to what it would be if you were developing on the outskirts of town on a greenfield site. So another example of this as far as targeting redevelopment in specific geographic neighborhoods, we have for a long time talked about specific areas of our core neighborhoods that are in need of redevelopment. We could make the very general statement moving forward that we would be supportive of looking at and considering opportunities for the use of tax increment financing in these core neighborhoods for specific types of purposes. So just keep that in mind. It's definitely not limited to the core, but that's where we've predominantly used it in the past. The third bullet point up here, leveraging our funds, stretching our capital dollars to ensure that they go as far as possible. What is it that we want to achieve as a community, and how can we utilize this tool responsibly to do that? An example of this, within our downtown, the administration for a long, long time through various downtown development plans has talked about our desire collectively as a community to see high density development occur. That oftentimes requires parking, whether that's public parking or private parking. Well, we can utilize tax increment financing to assist us with constructing parking. We can do that. So moving forward, those are the types of things that we would encourage as the administration, developers to consider when they come forward, is how can we utilize this tool to help both of us in the types of visions that we have for our community moving forward. There are multiple other ways as well in which we can kind of talk about as we go through even some of the inactive districts here that we have within our community. So a summary of TIF and TIF's use in Sioux Falls. The first district in Sioux Falls was created in 1989, and that was actually for all of our downtown. Our downtown was a little smaller at that time in terms of its geographic size, but the district encompassed all of downtown at that time. We have had 21 total districts since 1989. 12 of those are currently active. Inactive districts, I won't go through each of these, but if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions. There are a couple of very unique projects up there. Again, District 1, that was for all of downtown. You can see that just under $6 million of reimbursement was shared throughout that the entirety of that district, and it was for various projects within the downtown area. All Saints, completely different project as compared to District 1. So if you remember, back in 1994, the All Saints Historic School was under a great deal of disrepair. In fact, I think it was on the verge of being condemned. And Touchmark at All Saints partnered with a local developer to rehab that building and then add on to it as well. And so they came forward and applied for a tax increment finance district to assist with that. That district was dissolved in 2003, and the total reimbursement was around $700,000. The Morels district, this is a completely different district as well, and I wanted to comment on this one specifically because I think it helps explain that third bullet point that I had about leveraging our funds. So this district was created in 1994. At the time, it was thought that Morels was going to move forward with a very large expansion to their building. They ultimately did not do that, but what was also included in the project plan, other than the private improvements to Morels, was several city improvements that we wanted to see happen with respect to Falls Park. So the Visitors Center, the rehab of the Falls Overlook Cafe, that was all done through reimbursement through this TIF. So the natural incremental growth that occurred just from years of Morels being assessed over and over again without the project that they had originally identified moving forward, that incremental growth is what paid for those improvements to Falls Park. The other one that I'll comment on here, the post office project, I get a lot of questions about this when I put it on the sheet. That's why I wanted to answer that. So in 2005, the federal government, U.S. Post Office, had issued an RFP. They were looking at considering a new location within our downtown. Development team came forward. They brought forward a request for TIF to assist them in that effort. In the midst of or after creation of that district, the federal government pulled out, and so the district was dissolved. That project never moved forward. But the base value, you'll notice, is just under $800,000 on this. It actually decreased at the time that the district was terminated because there were buildings on the site that were removed during that time frame. So just wanted to explain that real briefly. Here's a map of all of the inactive TIF districts since 2005. I didn't include the boundaries for 1, 2, or 3 on here, but if you have questions, we can get that. It was just too big with that on there. 17 is in a box because that's outside of the core area and it couldn't be on this map very easily. All right, so that brings us to our active districts. And again, I won't go through each of these, but I wanted to comment on just a couple of them because they're unique maybe to what you've seen in the past couple of years. So the first being for Sharapa. In 2005, if you can picture that area, the Zip feed mill was still standing on the Sharapa site. The developer came forward, worked with the city to request a tax increment finance district. that assisted with the removal of the the Zip feed mill building, along with public improvements to that property. One of the things that's unique about this as compared to some of the more recent TIFs is that the city publicly bonded for the improvements associated with this district, and we are reimbursed for that bond from the increment. So oftentimes in other communities, you'll hear things said about the city's bonding capacity and whether or not they can actually take on any additional districts. We typically don't have that issue because we place the risk for the district on the developer. The developer is required to go out and obtain financing for the district, and that's why most frequently you'll see private financing as opposed to publicly bonded for TIFs in our community anyway. A couple of other very unique or more unique projects on here. Number 11 for Bancroft Apartments. We only have actually 2 active districts that are focused solely on housing. We have other mixed use housing, but we don't have many districts that are solely focused on housing. So we have Bancroft Apartments as number 11 and number 16, Whittier Housing. At the time that the Bancroft Apartment project was done, we were really excited as a community that was being brought forward because it was going to be a market rate housing complex offered within the Whittier neighborhood. And so we typically have not promoted the use of tax increment financing solely for housing, but that's another area in which the community can come forward and say, hey, we really have a niche for this type of housing within our community, and we would consider the use of this type of tool to incentivize that. So just keep that in mind as well moving forward. Another unique one on here, number 15 for the Sanford Sports Complex. This is unique because it's 3 different funding sources that were utilized within this TIF and being reimbursed through the TIF. So the city had eligible expenses that could be reimbursed through this TIF, as did Sanford and as did other nonprofits, including the tennis and hockey facilities. This TIF is also unique in the sense that the total reimbursable cost that was identified in the plan for as being an eligible expense that could be reimbursed was over $10 million. But what we're anticipating is that that's going to be closer to $6.3 million. So it's a good performing TIF in that sense outside of our downtown core area for sure. But we're excited that that's moving quicker than what we anticipated it. The last 3 on the screen, the Phillips Avenue Lofts, Washington Square, and the Cascade, these are all downtown projects, all privately financed by the developer, and all very large construction efforts within our downtown. This is a map showing all of the active districts in downtown. Number 15, which is located down in the corner, is of course northwest within our community, and that's the sports complex. Okay, so just a couple of quick additional informational pieces on some of these districts. So East Bank, I included this before and after because it's one of my favorite, quite frankly, before and afters of our downtown. And it encompasses TIF 5, TIF 10, and TIF 14. So TIF 5 was for Sharapa Place. TIF 10 is for the Lumber Exchange Building, otherwise known as CNA. And TIF 14 is for the downtown Hilton Garden Inn and removal of the existing parking ramp that used to cross the river. Sorry, not existing parking ramp, but former public parking ramp that used to cross the river. So you can see the change as far as the type of redevelopment that's occurred. And in large part due to the fact that we were willing as a community to support their use of tax increment financing and assist with those efforts. So TIF 5, again, Sharapa, the base assessed value at the time that the project or the district was created was just over $400,000. The current assessed valuation is just over $19 million. And you can see with TIF 10, Lumber Exchange, and TIF 14, the River Ramp, Hilton Garden Inn, those valuations are quite significant as well as far as the change because of the projects being completed. Again, we talked about this one just a little bit already, but this is the sports complex, the before and after for the sports complex. The base assessed valuation for the sports complex was just under $300,000 when that district was created, and currently it's over $36 million. So that's why we anticipate that district being paid off much sooner than what we had anticipated within the plan. We tend to be relatively conservative within those plans and try to make sure that we're projecting things out as fairly as possible. And so as opposed to that district being dissolved in 2032, which would have been a 20-year time frame, we're thinking that that could be 5 years out instead, which would cut it by 5 years. And then again, the estimated reimbursement will be just over $6 million versus over 10. The Cascade, this is the most recent TIF that was brought forward last fall. This is on North Phillips Avenue. The base valuation of this TIF was just under $400,000, and the projected valuation after the project is completed will be around $23 million. The estimated reimbursement is just under $6 million, and that includes the actual costs that were eligible within the in the plan, as well as financing costs associated with those publicly eligible improvements. Okay, so that brings us to the application process. Point of contact for applications moving forward is Dustin Powers, Planning and Development Services. Dustin's in the audience today, and I wanted to point that out, that he's the point of contact moving forward because of that merger that we did between Planning and Building Services and Community Development, just to make sure that you all know and the public knows that he's the point of contact for the applications. There is an ordinance that exists within the city that talks about the application being a requirement and then a fee for submittal of that application. And then just as a reminder, what you all are required to review and consider with respect to TIFs is the boundary for the TIF, the plan for the TIF that outlines those eligible costs for reimbursement, and then also the development agreement that's associated with that plan. Okay, the reporting process. One thing that we're working on, and I understand that the council has requested as well, is a TIF dashboard. And that dashboard is going to include all of our active districts moving forward, and it will be included in your monthly financial report. So when Tom comes forward to give that monthly financial report, if you have questions on that TIF district information in that, be more than happy to answer them at that time. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to contact me as well. We'll also have that dashboard on our website so that it's easily accessible to the public. And then also, each of those districts that were just on the screen, the boundaries and the plans for those districts are all on the city's website as well under Planning and Development Services. So if you ever have questions about, well, what's the boundary for TIF 15, or what were the eligible improvements that were going to be reimbursed through the TIF, all of that's outlined in each of those plans. Future collaboration on use of this tool. We want to make sure that not only are we communicating with the council, but we're communicating with our other partners as well. So Minnehaha County, Lincoln County, the Sioux Falls School District, and any other school district that's potentially impacted by the use of TIF. The Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Sioux Falls Development Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce. Dean Disick is in the audience today. I just wanted to point him out. He's representing the Development Foundation. But one of the things that we've recently talked about with the new president, Bob Munt, who you'll be able to meet, I believe, at an upcoming informational meeting, is the use of TIF moving forward and what they see as an organization as far as a need. So what kind of requests are they getting, and how can we bring those forward and have a community conversation about those requests so that they know, so to speak, what the rules of engagement are when it comes to talking about the use of this tool. Future applications. Last week I made reference to the fact that I anticipated future applications coming forward. We have several, as you know, large development projects being talked about within our downtown. One of those redevelopment sites includes Sioux Steel. I absolutely anticipate that they would bring forward a request for the use of tax increment financing. They have significant site issues that they are trying to figure out how to deal with right now. So I'm bringing that forward to you to make sure that you understand that before they actually bring forward an application and submit an application to us, they will come to us and they will talk through this process, and that's when I will engage the council. So it won't be at the time of application. You'll know well in advance that we're even having these conversations with Sioux Steel to begin with. Future application process, specifically for the Discovery District. I would anticipate that that will be a conversation that we will start to have again as well, especially as we gain momentum and traction out there with some of the recent announcements with respect to business growth. That will be something that we'll bring forward as well, and we'll talk very transparently with the council about. So if you have any questions about either of those specific projects, or even things that you hear within the community that might be coming forward, don't hesitate to contact me or contact Dustin and let us know. And we'll be more than happy to share any information that we have moving forward. The TIF dashboard is going to include all of the information that I presented to you with respect to these districts, plus more. So the spreadsheet would have been a little bit too big for me to include on the screen, and that's why I didn't choose to do that. But if there are questions, especially during this first meeting in a couple of weeks in which Tom comes and presents the monthly financials, I'll be here to respond to any of those questions so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to what those numbers represent. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Again, this was just a presentation to ensure that we were all on the same foundation moving forward with how we've utilized this tool and how we can utilize it in the future.
Thank you, Erica. We'll move to questions. Councilor Neitzer.
Is single-family housing eligible for TIF?
It is. We have never utilized it in Sioux Falls, but it is eligible per state statute. I didn't get into this in my presentation because it takes a lot longer to explain, but there are 3 different classifications that the state utilizes for tax increment finance districts: economic, industrial, and housing. And so, or I'm sorry, local, which typically encompasses housing. We have grown accustomed to not utilizing it for that purpose. We have always required developers to come forward and work through their subdivision improvements within either our capital program or a development-driven street and infrastructure improvement plan. There are other communities throughout the state that do utilize it for single-family housing quite extensively.
Okay. Has there ever been any thought of redeveloping an entire neighborhood using TIF?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Much like the first downtown TIF, right? If you think about it in that respect, you can draw a boundary as large as you want, but you have to be reasonable in terms of the types of improvements that you expect to get done within that first 5-year period. And so if you draw it too large and you're not able to accomplish as much as you had anticipated, then your TIF is not going to produce to the degree that you needed it to. And so you have to be cautious as far as how you do that, and the expectations for build out. So if we created I'll just use Pettigrew Heights as an example because we've talked about this quite extensively, and I think the majority of the administration, at least those that I've talked to, would love to see us focus again on Pettigrew Heights. There are very good things happening in Pettigrew Heights right now. There's a lot of momentum building for the private sector and nonprofits to begin reinvesting again in that neighborhood, but they need to see the city come alongside of them in a very focused way to showcase that we're in this with them. And so TIF has definitely come to those conversations, but also property tax abatement. So that's another conversation that we need to have, and we need to evaluate what's going to work better for a neighborhood setting. Is it a property tax abatement program that's more aggressive than what we have now? Because just as an example, without getting into too much detail on property tax abatement and mixing the two, the existing program that we have for neighborhoods has not been utilized, even though it's been in existence for over a decade. So clearly it's not enough of an incentive to entice anybody to use it in the core neighborhoods. So we have to figure something else out in order for us to be more aggressive and actually meet the types of goals and the vision for that neighborhood that we have.
And I would think with the single family, as an example, you're going to need, to make the TIF worthwhile, you need to have enough of an increment. So if all you're doing is creating one in a district where people are just replacing their siding, it's not going to move the needle. But if you've got houses falling over or completely empty blocks, then I suppose a TIF could make sense, but it probably isn't a great tool if it's just trying to just shine up some existing housing.
Right. You know, so we, several years ago, Mike's gonna need to correct me on this, but we put together a Pettigrew Heights neighborhood plan, just as an example, and we brought that forward for the council to approve. And that neighborhood plan gives us the opportunity to classify Pettigrew Heights as an urban revitalization district. And within that kind of a district per state statute, you can move forward and request collaboration with the county to do a single family tax rebate program. So that is on the table, but that's not the challenge. The challenge is how much improvement do you need to do to a single family home in order to increase the assessed valuation of the home to the degree that you would be able to rebate any property taxes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of evaluation and discussion that needs to go into that yet, but TIF is definitely a tool that could be utilized to assist with this if there were enough commercial development in an area that could have an increment generated to support what you're talking about.
Okay, and before I defer, because I have other questions, for parking, could you straight up do, for example, a developer says, I want to build a new high-rise and the parking is going to be expensive. Could I just have my parking ramp, which is the first 3 levels, reimbursed? We could conceivably do that if we so chose?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions? Councilor Brecky?
Mostly a comment and then maybe a question. Can you go back to the slide, how we can use this tool? And my comment is, I just want to kind of point out this as kind of a reinforcement both to Erica, because we've had these conversations and I've had these conversations with each of my council members. This kind of thing right here is exactly the kind of thing that the city can benefit from if the council and the mayor and the administration together engage in long-range strategic planning. Because these are just put in a random order, and there's subsections under each of them, which you kind of described. And this is a place where, if together as a city, we can prioritize these things. With the council having input, again, because we have our constituents, I'm hearing a lot of support for one of my preferences is to really try to move the development in the downtown and core areas. And, other people may be hearing other things, but if we engage in a long-range strategic planning, we can actually add some definition to that with the council's input, giving guidance to the mayor and the administration. So when they come forward with the projects, it could be done in an order that, excites us. So I just wanted to point that out and use that as an example where if we, start doing that and getting into a process of doing that, I think we can really, really serve the city well, working hand in glove with the mayor and administration. So thank you for the presentation. I think it was really, really helpful to me, just how everything that you laid out. I just finally feel like I'm getting a big picture feel for how to use this and how important it can be to the city and what an opportunity it can be for us to work together.
Thank you. Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things before I get too far in the weeds, but is there a benefit of public financing? I mean, that spread between the nonprofit or the city's bonding capacity versus what a private company could do, it would pay the district off quicker, or, I mean, in the big picture, probably in this timing, the spread's probably not as large as it would have been in the 70s or, at different times. Could you see a time where maybe that public bonding capacity would make more sense to do that?
Sure. I mean, TIF 5, I'll just use as an example. I mean, the city did take that responsibility on with that district. So there definitely is a time and place for it, and I think that we need to evaluate each case to some degree on its merits and depending upon where the private sector financing is at the time as well. But we should absolutely keep that on the table as an option.
Okay. One of the other things that I thought would be interesting as part of your presentation is we saw the difference between a few $100,000 that a property was worth and then it's 29 million. It'd be interesting to see that in actual property tax dollars, to say that it went from they were paying a few tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands that they're paying in property taxes now. So
sure, and that will be included in your dashboard, just as an example. So we'll have that as well. I know it's difficult. The assessed valuation doesn't equate out to the actual taxes being paid.
One of the other, if I can do one more here, I want to, one of the things I was thinking about is the slide that you used about how TIFs affect other units of government as well as the community. So I'm trying to remember my TIF 101, but how do TIFs affect the county, the school, and the state in this process? Because TIFs really come down to the decision-making of this body, but it affects those other bodies. So how would it affect the county and their property tax collection as well as the school? And then when the state has to make up some of that funding for the schools to hold them harmless in the whole process?
Right. So I'm going to split that into two and
Please.
take the state piece of it second. So basically what we have essentially three taxing entities: the school, the county, and the city. So when a district is established, that baseline valuation that I talked about, that's frozen and that continues to be paid out to those taxing entities over the life of the district. The funding, the TIF increment, and I want to be careful how I say this so that you understand how this works. The developer or the property owner continues to pay taxes over the life of the district outside of even the baseline. So they pay the full assessment of taxes every year. The baseline continues to go to the taxing entities. The incremental valuation does not. So the incremental valuation gets paid back or reimbursed based upon those eligible expenses. So those taxing entities are not receiving that over the life of the district. So the second part to that, the state is impacted specifically when the TIF is classified. So for the most part, I believe, other than the two districts that I referred to, the two housing districts, all of our districts are classified as economic, meaning that they are not a direct local impact to our school district. That is made up through the state aid formula, which is much more complicated than what I can explain. When the district is classified as local, the district itself has to make up for that formula. So one of the things that I'll comment on, because I know it's been a point of discussion over the last many, many years, is that despite the fact that the county and the school district are impacted, so to speak, by the district, they're not required to vote on this just like the city council is. So one of the things that we have done in the past is that we have taken this presentation, so to speak, of a proposed district to the county. And what I would offer is that collectively, if they came forward and they had a concern or an issue with what we were proposing, we would absolutely take a step back and address that at that time, because we know that there are partners in these conversations and discussions. Same with the school district. I don't believe we've ever presented to the school board, but I know that, in the past at least, I've had conversations directly with the superintendent and the finance officer about what we were proposing to do, and we'll continue to do that moving forward as well.
So I said I was done, but I'm not, of course. But when we look at classifying them as local and economic development versus the property tax abatement, does that affect the funding that the schools will get and the county versus whether we're classifying them as local? Is one better or worse? I hate classifying it that way. That's not the way I mean it, but you kind of get where I'm headed.
Yep. So the state's classification system is based on their definitions. So as an example, the local districts in which our housing projects fall into, that is defined per their definition of a district. So most of our downtown districts, as an example, TIF 15 for the sports complex, all of those districts have been considered to be economic districts because they involve more than one business, and it's not solely housing related. So there's sales tax revenue being generated off those districts typically, and that's how they're classified as economic. So there's not as direct of a challenge, perhaps, to the school district. The county's tax base is going to stay the same no matter what throughout that entire lifespan of the district.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Staley.
I've got a few tidbits here. Okay, first of all, I thought that TIF 17 never happened, the Costco one.
Yep, that was TIF 19. So TIF 17 did happen, but TIF 19 was the downtown housing TIF. And that is the project that did not occur.
Okay, so, because I thought Costco didn't participate in a TIF. Or what?
Correct. So the entirety of the site, the Williams Pipeline site, included the development of Costco, but none of the reimbursement went directly to Costco. It went to the developer for the site costs associated with that entire
So, all right,
site.
so, okay. Now, one thing, I guess, coming into this as a novice, of course, but when I first got elected, I was looking at TIF, and what my understanding is that it was developed initially as a tool to help blighted areas, to give incentives to people to step in and redevelop these areas. And you are listing land preparation, acquisition of land, utility relocation, finance costs. Those are all things that I think would appeal to any developer. If we say, hey, we're going to help you out with these things, very appealing. And so what keeps coming back to me is the word fairness in our community. I'm grateful that Councilor Neitzer brought up single-family housing, but who is deciding who gets the TIF and who doesn't? Fairness. Dustin Powers decides, maybe. Fairness. Mike Cooper maybe is deciding. Fairness. So if we open this up to the community and say, hey, you know, you need some help with, you want to buy some land and we're help with putting utilities on, you're going to build, you know, you got maybe an old area in the center of town, nothing's on it, and you're going to build yourself a, you know, a fourplex, TIF, here we come. And going back, I'm going to go back to the Lloyd property that I did oppose, but I think that they were paying, is it like $17,000 in property taxes? It was something like that. Area was, it was like $40,000, $17,000. Do you remember, Erica, what the?
For the Cascade, I think it was under 20,000.
Yeah, okay. So that what's going to happen is that they're going to be paying $17,000 to the county for the next 10 years, 14 years. And by the way, I thought that was a 4.3 million. Now you said it's 6 million. I mean, I thought our initial
reimbursement?
Yeah, I thought it was 4.3 million.
It's 4.1 million in hard costs, and it's just over $1 million in financing costs associated with that 4.1.
Because okay. So anyway, back to that issue of fairness, and who's making a decision? Who's going? Let's see. We see this lovely vacant, desecrated field that is going to be renovated, but we have a lot of places around town that are going to look like that. So are we going to open this opportunity up to anybody? And does the council get to see every person who's interested? Are we going to be aware of anybody who comes to Dustin and applies for this? Do we see that, Erica?
You will if they make an application, certainly, and that's how it's been treated in the past couple of years, as if someone has actually come forward and made application. I think that the standard is that within 7 days, the council has to be made aware of that.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that when someone comes forward and brings up the use of tax increment financing, I would bring that forward to the council and share that with you. The one thing I would state, though, and in regards to your question about fairness, I'm all for fairness with respect to the use of this tool, but in the sense that we are making a statement up front about what our priorities are as a community and how we want to see the tool used. So there are challenges with overusing the tool, and if I could, I'll just comment on that without throwing any of our adjacent communities under the bus, so to speak. So TIFs, when you bring on a TIF, and that's why you see them reported the way you do in our budgeting book, they count against our bonding capacity. So in the example of a community just to the south of us, they had brought on or approved tax increment finance districts that pushed them over the edge, so to speak, in terms of their bonding capacity, to the extent that they had to go to the county Lincoln County and request their assistance in approving a TIF on their behalf because Lincoln County had the bonding capacity and they didn't. So we do want to be cautious in terms of how much we utilize and make sure that it's for a purpose that we as a community want to see occur in our
Exactly, but I mean, as a community, I guess we haven't, as a council, haven't been involved in that conversation. Is what do we see it? Where do we see the priorities being?
Right.
And what's coming to my mind as I see the people who've gotten TIFs is this quote, and I think it's a scriptural quote, but those who have will be given more. And so a lot of the people who have gotten TIFs already have acquisitions of properties and buildings, and to me, it would be exciting to see it being used to help somebody, just an average person who says, here's a vacant piece of land, I'd like to put a fourplex up, I need some help with the infrastructure, and why wouldn't we be giving it to them as well? The other thing that I think is that we need to take a look at, and I know Dean is here, the Discovery District, I know we've given them some tax money through the it's all kind of commingled here with the Development Foundation, Forward Sioux Falls. We got the Zeal Center somehow tied into this. And so when we're already giving them money and then we're talking about them coming to the table again to get a TIF, it gets a little bit murky as to, again, those who have already gotten will receive more. And I want to make sure in a community that we're looking out and encouraging everybody to participate. And we could even have somebody getting a piece of land and say, hey, put a tiny house development out here, or building things that will encourage home ownership on a smaller scale. That's appealing. One last question. The Hidden Hills apartment complex on North Cliff, did that get a TIF?
It did.
Well, okay.
It is referred to on
And
here
I encourage all my colleagues to drive through that complex sometime and see that it's our TIF money at work. But
So this is TIF 16, and the comment that I'll make for you here is remember that when we have the opportunity to bring these plans forward before the council, we have the benefit of tax increment financing to the city is that we have the opportunity to negotiate with the end user. So if there are specific things, and I think there are, that you maybe don't appreciate as much about that development, such as that there's no playground equipment, that's something that we can push forward through that TIF development agreement.
Are you talking about 16?
Correct.
Well, a thing I have a concern about, and I would encourage anyone to drive into there, is you can't get out. You drive in, there's no access to get out. And I've been in there several times, and the only way you can get out of that when you go to the end of that is you can drive into someone's garage and try to back out. So I don't know how they were allowed to put that in there without some kind of a cement area as a turnaround. If there'd ever be a fire or an ambulance need in there, we've got a big problem. So how did that happen?
I apologize, Councilor Staley. I'm not as up to speed with that district, but we can definitely bring back answers for you on that one.
Yeah, I'd like that, because, we're concerned about safety, and that's, again, go in and see for yourself how easy it is to get out of there. It's a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Can I respond real quick to your comment about the fairness and the fourplexes, and just using that as an example? We absolutely want to provide more opportunities. And I think when I bring forward the property tax abatement program concept and go through that with you, we can talk about how that could be utilized specifically for that purpose. Because sometimes with TIF, it's not as easy to do a tax increment finance district on a small project. So if your project isn't going to generate enough increment, it's not worth it necessarily to the owner or the developer. But with that said, we do have another tool, and that's the property tax abatement program that could be utilized to help that kind of a situation. So that's what I wanted to talk about with respect to this being a tool. We have to determine how we want this tool to work for our community and what kinds of projects we want to see happen and where we want to see those projects happen. And then how can we utilize that tool or this tool for that purpose? So we want to include you in that discussion, just like we want to include those other entities, those other partners of ours in those discussions as well, so that we can make sure that, yes, we're being fair, but we're also achieving the end result that we need for our community. Same with property tax abatement, and that's why we're going to be bringing that back forward to this body for review as well.
And if I may, one more thing. When we get the dashboard thing,
Yep.
so like, for example, Sharapa Place we're going to be seeing what they're actually paying on property taxes, which would be what the Zip Feed Mill was paying? Is that, I mean?
The baseline, yes.
Yes.
You'll see the baseline valuation, and then you'll also see what they're paying right now. And then that is what the increment is. That's being paid to the county, being remitted to the city, and then the city's remitting back to the developer or owner.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, and you just hit on something I wanted to make sure to point out is that, so if your base valuation is $1 million, for example, and then you start your development, that's your base value, and then it's reassessed at $2 million, your property taxes now go up. You're still paying all that property tax. It's just that increment, the portion of that increment goes basically, let's call it into a bank account that the city kind of holds in trust. And then you submit receipts, as it were, to show I've done eligible expenses, and you can get reimbursed. So over the years, as that increment's increasing, they're paying property tax into it. There might be a couple $1 million sitting in that bank account, and then they submit receipts of eligible expenses and up to that amount of money.
Yeah, typically, I mean, when the taxes are paid, Minnehaha County receives that payment. They remit it to the city. The city then, in turn, turns around and remits it back out to the developer. So we're not really holding it per se in a bank account because
they many times would have receipts queued up and ready to be reimbursed. Yeah, because a lot of it is front loaded, for example.
Correct.
But theoretically, there could be stuff going into it. But
Right.
anyway, you're okay.
For those larger districts, sometimes those reimbursable costs, occur over the lifespan of that first 5 years, and so it's not always up front. That's why each district is so unique and different from the others.
Another conversation that would be worthwhile to have is obviously how much do we want to stick to the but-for argument? Is that going to be a hard rule that we're going to say you've got to show a but-for? For example, it's been blighted for 20 years, or are we going to, be okay with a big business wants to come into town that's going to bring a bunch of high-paying jobs, that sort of thing. And that's not a discussion for today, but something to think about. So when you look at a TIF and somebody comes in and they want to do a project, you obviously come up with some number that the maximum reimbursement is that you're going to support, I guess is the word. How do you decide on what number that is? Why would you say we'll reimburse up to 5 but not 10 million?
Oftentimes it's based upon what we anticipate the district will even, the increment will even be generated. And again, we take a pretty conservative approach to, evaluating that. But in the past, especially with the past 3 TIFs, let's just say 3 or 4 anyway that I can think of, it's been very focused on that but-for and very, very focused on specific public improvements. So remediation costs, the costs of soil and bedrock work associated with projects. And that's why I think, again, we need to have that conversation. Do we want to be so focused on but-for, or do we want to look at how we want to use this tool to achieve our goals and our vision for our community moving forward? Because there are opportunities, just as an example, state statute was changed probably 10 years ago now to allow for, just as an example, a project plan to be brought forward and not even refer to public improvements. That would be reimbursed. But instead, create an economic development grant. So oftentimes you'll see communities luring businesses to their town and creating a TIF and an economic development grant through that project plan that doesn't require them to submit receipts, so to speak, on those eligible expenses. And the community has to weigh in on whether or not, 1, they're comfortable with that, and 2, if they are, is there a threshold that we want to consider evaluating based upon the business, the number of jobs, and other variable factors, that might be included in that. So there's also, there's many, many different ways that we can sculpt this program because it's a tool and it's allowed very flexibly within state statute. So as an example, the max time frame is 20 years. If we wanted to do something more creative along the lines of economic grants for businesses, we could say that we were supportive of that, but we would only create a district for up to 10 years, just as an example. There are a multitude of ways that we can utilize this tool, and it's good in the sense that it gives us local control and allows us to say what we want the results of the use of this tool to be, and then guide its use based on that.
Okay, thank you. Last couple things. The dashboard, would you be updating that monthly with like the payouts, or would that only be maybe biannually as there's property tax and things like that? How often would you update that?
Good question. I off the top of my head, I don't think that there are probably monthly updates that even occur necessarily. It'll probably be biannually. Okay. I'm almost thinking that it will be biannually, but I need to confirm that with Tom. Okay.
And can you go to, I think it was maybe your example that showed the 900 and some thousand near the beginning of the presentation? And I know this has already been talked about, but that would be so valuable for everybody to be able to discuss, because the increment is one thing, but to be able to see, like, were they paying $12,000 in property tax and now they're paying $100,000? What, it'd be to be able to do a break-even analysis, for example, and say that, if we paid out $1 million, or they were reimbursed for $1 million. I should say that we didn't pay out, but and the increment, the property tax have now increased, $100,000. Obviously, all of us are in the gravy after 10 years, for example. To be able to show, that's because people kind of look at that part and what the other entities may be, losing out on, but it'd be good to be able to show that at the end,
right?
It's kind of like just same thing as if I'm replacing a furnace. Where's my break even in the cost savings, and then I'm in the gravy. So sure. Does it take 50 years or does it take 8 years? So.
And you'll see that in the dashboard. In fact, again, for the majority of the districts, if I'm saying this correctly, I think other than maybe a couple, we've allowed that 20-year max life cycle. But most often, especially with some of our earlier districts, they paid off much quicker than that, so to speak. So I think that we can show you in that dashboard what you're looking for, and then also when we anticipate when that district will be paid off based upon what's currently happening as far as incremental growth and that assessed valuation.
And if I may, one more thing, but going back to what Councilor Neitzer is saying, again, the fairness issue that, yes, this is a nice situation. They, in addition to us, of course, collecting property taxes on this owner has now got a property that's valued at many times more than what he started out with or she started out with. So once again, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for some people, but who's deciding who those people are? And so I feel sorry that somebody was going to get it, somebody isn't. What's the criteria on that? If it's a blighted issue, great, but if it's something, let's say that person can do it without the TIF, how do we determine that? And I just would I don't ever want a citizen coming back to me and saying, this special deal's for these special people, other people don't get in on the deals. We don't want to have that thing happening. So sure.
It's very understandable. I agree.
Councilor Starn.
Yes, I wanted to, one of the things that when I've been talking about economic development with people, and I'll probably paraphrase this a little bit and probably butcher it, and I've heard it in a couple of different forms, so as I scratched it down while we're talking about this, and I think Councilor Staley's onto something, but economic development tools aren't need-based. It goes to what are we trying to promote as a community? Where are we trying to give those incentives to make things happy? To make to correct problems that we see in our community, to move us forward in that economic development, whether it's better paying jobs and wages that go with it, and where do we do that to give those incentives. And I'm not quite there that I'm buying the whole statement that it's not need-based, but you don't go out and give incentives to a company that is close to filing bankruptcy. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to do that, because you would be scared that the project wouldn't move forward. But I think, to sum up what we're saying this afternoon, is that we're looking for the administration's philosophy of how we would use TIFs as well as the thing. And I think that's a good part of, I think Councilor Brecky was talking about some long-term strategic planning. These are the kind of things that we want to see. We want to see this type of economic development. We want to see these kinds of incentives to make better parts of our community that aren't the best they could be right now, and to provide that affordable housing and those things moving forward. So I'm looking forward to having this debate and giving you the policy guidelines to go out and make this tool work for our community.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, I had a couple questions that got asked. I did have one that I was kind of curious about in regards to Councilor Neitzert's question, where, how do you kind of come up with a number when you're first coming up with these things? You'd mentioned anticipating Sioux Steel would probably be, there'd be a TIF possibility, and you also said you anticipated they would probably have some site issues. Is it the same type thing that we've seen before downtown? Do you see anything unique? I just was kind of curious on what you've seen from that in the past. Or
I've had some very basic conversations with them, and I would say based on that, they've done a lot of due diligence thus far, having groups come out and evaluate, even doing some pretty unique evaluations of the site, and it's nothing different. Just as an example though, they did have a quarry on that site. I think the earliest aerial photography, I'm sorry, not the earliest, the latest was 1950s. The quarry was still there, and so as you can imagine, there are some challenges with soil conditions, bedrock, the fill that was used to fill in the quarry, all of those types of things, cause some additional extraordinary costs on these types of projects. So it's nothing unusual or what we haven't seen necessarily downtown before. When evaluating that number, there are so many different factors that come in that go into this. There are so many. Oftentimes, the city needs to ask the question, and they have done a good job at asking this question of the developer. Typically, showcase to us that you have a need. Showcase to us that you have a need for this. And so the developer comes back and provides a lot of additional information, typically, that does showcase that need. In fact, I think the last district, number 21, that was created, the city at the time even went out and asked a third party to evaluate the request and all the documentation that was provided in order to ensure that there was truly a need. And so there are ways of doing this, but I think it's a good standard, so to speak, to ask the developer, is there a need for this? On the other side of that, however, what I would also say is that if the city is pushing for something to happen, if we are pushing for something to happen, if we are pushing for redevelopment of a neighborhood, if we are encouraging a developer to think bigger, to create more density of development on their site, to take us as a community to the next level, then we have to go along with them in that effort too. There's a way to do that comprehensively, and we can create more of that analyzed approach to assessing, where that break-even point is that you're referring to. In fact, I think Washington Square did that when they submitted their application. They also provided some documentation that they had a consultant do for them that showcased the economic impact to the community of that project. And so there are different ways that we can come up with that number and help to justify what it is that's being proposed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Okay, we are to the public input portion of the meeting. I'd invite anybody from the public to come forward to speak on anything that we've spoke about on the agenda, and you've got up to 5 minutes. Welcome.
You'll leave them right here, right? Scott, Sioux Falls. TIFs, one of my favorite topics. There was an interesting comment made by Chief of Staff Beck earlier. She said that, you know, when we have a TIF with a developer, we can negotiate with them on the terms of how this development's going to build. Well, guess what? The city negotiates with every developer in this town. It's called building codes. They have to follow them. That should be really the only negotiation the city should have with any kind of developer. There's been many studies done about TIFs. You can go look them up. They provide very little economic impact, anywhere between 0 to maybe up to 20% payback. They also harm funding of public education. Right now in our city, we're looking at bonding about $500 million between the schools, the jail, and the water treatment plant. Why on earth would we be giving property tax rebates, because that's what a TIF is. They pay their money in, they get it back, to developers when for the past 6 years, we have had record building permits. That tells me our city isn't, developers in the city are not hurting. They don't need incentives. They are doing very well. And when we're spending, what people don't realize is that when somebody's getting a tax rebate like a TIF, and the school, for instance, takes out a $190 million bond, all of our taxes go up to supplement that person who's getting the rebate. A lot of people don't know that. So in essence, we pay more as homeowners and property and small business owners for our existing properties that we own to supplement and rebate developers in this community. And the original use of TIFs was actually a good idea, you know, for really bad land, blighted land, affordable workforce housing. That's kind of gone out the window. Now it's well, you want to build it over here, so we'll just give you a TIF. It doesn't really matter what it's about. You know, $1 million condos right over here. That flabbergasted me that we gave a TIF to that. Councilor Neitzer brought up a good thing that I've often said: we should eliminate TIFs and we should use that money instead to redevelop neighborhoods. You go into a certain section of the neighborhood, let's say Pettigrew Heights, and you block off a certain area, and you go around to the people in that area and go, we're going to give you property tax rebates if you fix your roof, if you clean up your yard, if you do this. That would be a better use and a better economic impact cleaning up these neighborhoods than just saying, oh, you're a big developer that's going to build a big apartment building, so we're just going to give you a tax rebate. And like I said, you don't have to believe me. Google it all you want. There's been extensive studies done on TIFs and the little economic impact that they provide. And especially now in this city, when we're borrowing $500 million, over $500 million, once interest payments come in, this is the wrong time to be giving rebates to developers that are doing very well. If we weren't having record building permits, and we were really down on development and people weren't building apartments and weren't building houses and stuff, I'd say, yeah, we got to do something, man. That's not the case. It's the total opposite. There's people building like crazy. They can't build fast enough. People can't hire construction workers fast enough. And we're giving tax rebates? Our priorities are extremely messed up, in my opinion, on that. And like I said, one more time while I still have some time, go do your own research. Don't have to believe me. The economic impact of TIFs never pay for themselves, ever.
Thank you. Anybody else have any input today? Okay, if not, I would ask for a motion to move into executive session.
Mr. Chair, I move to enter into executive session for the purpose of preparing for contract and negotiations or negotiating with employees or employee representatives per South Dakota Codified Law 125-2-4.
Second, Neitzer.
Okay, I'd ask for a roll call vote, please.
Council members Brecky, Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale, Starr,
Yes.
Staley.
Yes.
All right, that is passed 6-0. I'd ask that everyone not involved in the executive session please to depart, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.